cars, snow, multiplayer, and survival. Good, now that I have your attention for that sweet YouTube algorithm, I can tell you all about the cool project that we've been spending the last couple of months on, and more importantly, how we went from this to this. So it all really came from the brilliant idea of combining a game such as The Long Drive, which is just a lot of fun and freedom, with more of an atmospheric survival take that's pushing scarcity for more of a challenge. And on top of this, we really wanted to expand on this idea of having a moving base. So in this game, it's all about your vehicle and your trailer. Now, this does mean that we need vehicles, building, inventory, procedural world generation, points of interest, loot, rarity and stat tables, balancing, and not bigger. Okay, but before we get into any of this, we have to start from the beginning, essentially with the vehicle. So first, I simply made a big box. Of course, because I wouldn't want to flaunt my artistic talents. So this box will be acting as the testing vehicle. I also gave it a physics body, so it's technically a vehicle by definition, right? But before really doing anything, I first have to figure out how we simulate the driving physics with a truck. And although I do love cars, my car isn't much of a truck with soft suspension. The way I thought about doing it was adding an upwards force at the point of the suspension when it gets too close to the ground. So generally this works, and we now have a floating cube that will adjust itself to the ground underneath the four corners. And you can also see these lines that are drawn here, which essentially show the distance to the ground that it's checking, and depending on the color, whether it actually thinks that it hits the ground or not. Now, some devs do start with a plan, but not me. I essentially just start with panic and raw sex appeal. So now that we have this super basic suspension setup, let's add some wheel visuals so that we can actually see a little better what's going on and what we should be aligning with. Now, game development is majority smoke and mirrors, and this is really no different. So the visuals of the wheels are, well, just that, they're visuals. So I set it up now so that I have a 3D model that actually aligns with the ground with some offset for the radius of the wheel. And that should pretty much now just have the visual positioning working. And lastly, I need to rotate with the speed at which the ground moves below. This whole setup is really something that needs to be updated later, but that's an issue for future me. For now, we need something to test properly with, and what we have very much does the trick. I also just very quickly set up a car body that just makes it a bit nicer to test with, you know, a bit more like a real life scenario. So now, believe it or not, but there is actually a whole lot more to suspension on cars. But with the fear of boring you to death, let me speedrun this before you leave for better devlogs. First, we need the ability to check for more points. So it actually checks in a circular shape to mimic a bit more of a wheel, which is the fan that you see drawn out here. Then I added the rest length, which is essentially at what point the suspension will be trying to rest in its natural state. Also added some sagging and some general damping ratio to better emulate the way a suspension actually acts. As you may know, suspensions aren't just springs, they are dampeners with springs, which more so acts to soften the bounce than actually bounce. Real suspensions are complicated, so I just kept modifying the numbers until the car eventually stopped fist fighting gravity. Now I also added bump stop, which is essentially at what point the car's suspension can no longer go any lower. So if you've ever gone over a speed bump too quickly and it felt really bad and sounds even worse, well, it means that you fucked up, but also that you hit your bump stop. And lastly, we need to know some wheel width, so it actually checks on both the inside and the outside of the wheel. And voila, now we have a suspension setup that I think actually looks and feels really good. It also allows for us to set up custom stats for various wheels, making it a really nice element of balancing for the gameplay. And because I've made the whole thing from scratch, we really have the maximum amount of freedom to implement it however we see fit in the future. And as a funny little extra note, the wheels do visually slightly clip into the terrain when hitting bumps and such. And similar to my berth, this is something that wasn't really intended, but turned out quite well, I think. Both to emulate soft wheels, but also the fact that we're driving in snow, which is obviously a softer terrain. And a wise man once said, there are no mistakes, just happy accidents. Now, another thing that I'm currently cheating with a bit here is that the wheels are generating their own torque, like some kind of communist union that I did not authorize. This is obviously wrong. In real life, the torque used to drive the car comes from the engine, so I'll have to change this a bit. Now, I won't be building out the full engine functionality just yet, although we do want torque curves, gearing ratios and all that good stuff added to the game. But for now, I'm just really not mentally prepared for that. For now, I'll have a constant torque figure coming from the vehicle to the wheels, and I'll simply spread it out amongst the wheels that are set as the driving wheels. So for example, if we make 1500 pound-feet of torque and we have four-wheel drive, we'll split that out to all the wheels evenly, so they each pull 375 pound-feet of torque. It's about the force that it takes to pull your mother. This is something we'll also have to balance differently in the future, but for now, I think it serves its purpose. And lastly is actually turning the car, and similar to the driving wheels, we'll assign some wheels as the turning wheels. Now, I know what you think, well, that's just the front wheels, and you'd be correct, but I don't want to limit us going forward, so I'm building it so that any wheels of the truck can become the turning wheels. So we could technically have rear wheel steering, for example, or four-wheel steering, which my car has, which is something I think is a cool level of freedom to leave us going forward. Maybe we'll add some more special and unique vehicles going forward, who knows. Now, next up, we need an actual playable character. This way we should be able to move around, get in and out the car, and actually start feeling more like a game. Well, throughout my game development experience, all the way from being a kid to a professional, I've made hundreds of player characters. So nothing here is really particularly challenging. Setting up basic movement and camera controls, input management, and all that good stuff I really don't want to bore you with. And there you go. Now we have this in the game and our character model with some very basic animations, and boom, we have a character. He runs, he jumps, he exists, and frankly, I think he's doing better than a lot of us. Of course, he'll do way more in the future, but that's not exactly our current goal, which is getting the car set up and running. Now, one thing I also very quickly want to touch on is just briefly the topic of multiplayer, as it's something very core to the game. And although it will be playable, both single player and co-op, multiplayer development is always something that's very intrusive to code. So we need to keep in mind from the very beginning. And luckily, the per-net networking solution is just really easy for this. Just some super basic synchronization of the player characters, as well as some super basic handling of the physics of the vehicle, and it's really as easy as that. At least for now. We can see our characters move around in real time, and we can see the car move around, which is just really cool. So other than just having a character that can move around and a super awesome car that can drive, the two needs to be connected. So let's set it up so the player can now be identified in the vehicle as in a seat, and depending on which seat will have different levels of control. Now, the way you currently get in and out of the vehicle is just by pressing on the door. So here you can see me going into the driver's seat so that I can drive around, or I can get into the passenger seat so I can passage. And as you can also see here, this was the very first test where my body stayed outside the car while my soul went for a drive. But now, after some debugging and solving issues, you can see that I can successfully, in multiplayer, get in as either the driver or the passenger, and we can drive around together, see each other in the vehicle, and I think that already just feels really cool. And that's really about it. I'm very interested in seeing what people think about this game. The Steam page is already up, so make sure to go and wishlist the game. It's really the best way to show support, other than, of course, liking, commenting, and subscribing. And other than that, I'm really looking forward to seeing the comments, see what people want for this kind of game, and if there is a real interest for this kind of game. And other than that, I just hope that you have a wonderful day.